Yolanda Norris-Clark gazes placidly into the camera, speaking in her best ASMR voice, that's code for cult leader, honey-colored bangs lying flat against her forehead as if stuck there by glue. She is, she says, with her 5 youngest children, she has 8, in the jungles of Costa Rica, where she's recently relocated from her home in Canada. Quote, "This global reconfiguration has nothing whatsoever to do with a flu-like illness, and it just seems heavier and darker and more constrictive than I could have imagined. It's not about a flu-like illness. It's never been about a flu-like illness, and I really think Rona is irrelevant to all of this," she says. Thus begins the recent Rolling Stone magazine story, published a couple of weeks ago now, that focuses in large part on me and my work. The article is a rhetorically complex and exceedingly flattering piece written by a certain EJ Dickson, a staff writer, apparently, with Rolling Stone, and someone who appears to be a young woman who, in her Instagram bio, describes herself as, quote, "mom, but not gross about it," end quote. Meaning, I'm assuming, not gross about motherhood like some of those other moms out there, because one can only assume Dickson believes that so many women are so very gross about their mothering. But Dickson's not like that, and it's clearly very important to her that you understand that she's different from all those other gross moms. Now at this point you might be wondering just how on earth Dickson happened to have landed that staff writer position with Rolling Stone magazine, but when I took a look at the list of recent pieces she had written for Rolling Stone, well, goodness, everything becomes clear. Among her recent works are articles on the topics of porn, the rather depressing OnlyFans phenomenon, strippers, and the aesthetic use of period blood on television. All highly prescient issues of the day. Now I'm going to go into most of EJ Dickson's invigorating, edifying article, but I want to first quickly wish everyone a very happy New Year. I took some much needed time off from everything. I finally just reunited recently with my family. I was, in fact, in Costa Rica a few weeks ago with one of my older children, as I had been invited to attend a twin birth there, and my husband, along with our 5 youngest children, had remained where we'd landed first after leaving Canada in the Caribbean. And so Dickson's reportage in this case was incorrect, but I suspect purposefully so, in order to maintain her clever ruse of posing as an incompetent writer. I'm now in a new, undisclosed location, but still in the tropics, and our family is thankfully together again. We've just moved to a new house, and I want to say for the record that my intention is to hitherto always be traveling together. Those first few weeks that my husband and I were apart was actually the longest period of time by far that we haven't slept side by side in the past 15 years, and while absence did indeed make the heart grow fonder, we've all missed each other way, way too much, and so we're hopefully sticking together from now on for sure. Now, if you find my work intriguing or helpful or interesting, please consider supporting me. I write about my experiences mothering in the jungle, and I share these videos with the world. I also have a private community where I show up 4 times a week to lead women's circle calls and lectures, and it's a space for women who are critical of the status quo and who stand unabashedly for freedom and for personal sovereignty, including bodily sovereignty and medical sovereignty and free speech. So you can find my work at patreon.com/bahousewife. I'm also a traditional birth attendant, and I have been for almost 20 years, and I'm the co-creator and co-instructor of the Radical Birthkeeper School, which is a midwifery education program for women on the path of radical birth work. Radical independent birth work, I should say. Now back to Rolling Stone. The writer of this article, EJ Dickson, refers to me personally as a, quote, self-described writer, birth educator, free birth coach, and iconoclast, which is indeed how I refer to myself on my Instagram bio. A description that was initially intended to be somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but in fact, upon reflection, I am dedicated to smashing what I see as the icons of our age, those corrupt institutions that spread propagandist lies and that uphold the power structures that serve to perpetuate the dependency and, frankly, the enslavement of ordinary people to corporate hegemony, such as the most prominent mainstream media organizations, right? And this is precisely why I have to emphasize how incredibly refreshing and hopeful it is, inspiring even, to see writers like EJ Dickson so courageously infiltrating those corrupt media organizations in valiant support of the cause of medical freedom and the liberation of humankind from corporate tyranny. And Dickson does it brilliantly. Because at first glance, it might seem as though Dickson's article, despite its hilarious, blatantly misogynistic, overwrought, and, dare I say, hysterical title, Pastel QAnon is infiltrating the natural parenting community, is sincere. But as soon as one begins to read the piece, it becomes glaringly obvious that the article is indeed a caricature, written with the objective of highlighting the manner in which the mainstream media functions at the behest of the pharmaceutical industry, and that these interests are not only controlling, avaricious, and predatory beyond what I think most people realize, but most importantly, that the independent health freedom movement is actually winning. Why else would a person like me, an independent home birth attendant, a very, very small-scale business health and parenting coach, a writer, and a middle-aged mother, possibly even a gross one, certainly an outspoken one, why else would someone like me be targeted by the likes of Rolling Stone magazine? I mean, gosh, it is flattering, I'll admit. But honestly, my dream was never to be featured in Rolling Stone magazine, not even as a musician, let alone as an infamous mommy blogger. And the whole thing seems a tad baffling. Baffling, that is, until one begins to really look beyond the surface of the entire social, medico-political landscape of our world right now, at some of the deeper connections between Rona, lockdown, mandates, injections, big finance, and corporate media. It's fascinating, isn't it, that I am being so vociferously defended by EJ Dickson in Rolling Stone magazine, but that she has to do so in such a roundabout way, using humor and the pretense of atrocious writing to highlight the fact that I have zero connection with any corporations or institutions or organizations, and that I am 100% independent, and that the idea that my ideas are hazardous, and that I and anyone like me doing similar work might be a raptorial figure of some sort, well, it's frankly insane. Heck, I don't even sell products through endorsements. I'm not even a social media influencer at all. Well, that might change in the future. Like any caring and responsible mother, I am very interested in supporting my family and in providing for them with abundance, and so it may be the case in the future that I do decide to become an affiliate for other people's products, but as of now, I am not. I am a lone wolf entirely. I don't even have a trust fund. I never did. Poor little me. Now, I'm sure there are some people out there who've read the Rolling Stone article and who interpreted it at face value, as a direct hit piece, maybe as an attempt to destroy me, but certainly as a serious warning cry, alerting the general public to just how dangerous I am, and as an earnest call to have me, and others like me, censored at the very least. Individuals, that is, who have risked their reputations, their livelihoods, and their safety, not to mention the safety of their families, to stand up for the fundamental human right to bodily integrity and the right to make any and all medical decisions oneself, and the fundamental freedom to retain privacy and basic dignity. But I can't help but think that those who might take Dickson's article as genuine would have to be few and far between, and that almost everyone who's read the story can see, and hopefully appreciate, Dickson's dazzling ploy immediately. Because here's the thing. No self-respecting journalist would ever seriously submit such dross to an editor. If the article were straight and not satire, as it is, the fact that it's full not only of so many turgid turns of phrase and such an overabundance of cliches, but also replete with just flat-out incorrect information, all of that would disqualify this piece entirely from publication in any rag, and certainly in Rolling Stone, one might assume, as that institution still purports to be something of a quality magazine, doesn't it? But parody works differently, which is obviously why Dickson's piece was picked up by Rolling Stone, one can only assume. Dickson's brilliance as a satirist is primarily revealed in the way that she skewers the utterly absurd and yet deeply psychologically manipulative notion that the primary risk that people in the world are facing right now is not that we are being compelled to unwittingly build our own artificial intelligence surveillance control grid to benefit a tiny group of elite multi-billionaires, the first step towards which is coercing the most vulnerable among us to accept an inadequately tested experimental biologic injection, which pharmaceutical companies have openly stated will not guarantee immunity, will not guarantee a reduction in symptoms, will not preclude or relieve the supposed necessity to ensure that our face diapers are in place every time we leave our homes, because the face, of course, has become the social equivalent of a genital, a nether zone, indecent. No. That's not the concern. Don't worry about any of that at all. Instead, Dickson uses me and my story in order to expose the insanity in the way that the media is programming the public to fear the conspiracy theorist, those among us who have been pointing out that we are being disciplined, trained to submit to mind control operations, as opposed to rightfully fearing the totalitarian coup that we are being subjected to by those in power. It's quite an ingenious feat of literary pyrotechnics, shall we say. Let's not forget that just 6 months ago, the suggestion that being forced to wear a mask was the precursor to being compelled to submit to an injection, that idea was laughed at and dismissed as, again, conspiracy theorizing. But now it's here. And the people who were laughing are now rationalizing, incapable, most of them, apparently, of resolving their own cognitive dissonance, and so they remain determined, committed to contorting their own perspective in order to position the authorities they have been trained to trust and even to love as benevolent. And so I have to thank EJ Dickson with all my heart. In her article, Pastel QAnon is Infiltrating the Natural Parenting Community, Dickson employs her masterfully strategic use of what is most certainly deliberate narrative burlesque and reveals with crystal clarity, through her betrayal of the mainstream media, just exactly how venal, vicious, and pathetic that institution has become, or perhaps has always been. Dickson effectively lampoons the way that the media lies outright about people like me in order to further its own objectives. Again, I'm a totally independent writer, a mother with zero corporate backing or funding of any kind, and with absolutely no incentive for doing what I do, other than a genuine concern for the widespread loss of rights and freedoms that we as individuals and as parents are experiencing. A daily, it seems, hemorrhaging of rights, which I think many of us, even a decade ago, would have assumed were indelible. But the media doesn't want you to be concerned about that. Again, the media wants you to fear those who would point this out, those who would point out the deterioration of our rights and freedoms. Why? Because the media is owned by the same people who make and sell injections. The media is owned by the same people who print money and who are now using the story of a global pandemic to restructure the financial system. The media is owned by the same people who furnish, structure, fund, and control global military operations and technology companies. It's all the same people. And in order to continue to dominate you, those people require both your willing capitulation and your fear. Fear and capitulation are also developed through a particular kind of trauma-based programming. That programming begins before birth through interventions like ultrasound, and it's very much related to the larger project of transhumanism. What's happening in the world right now is the digitization of humanity. And at the core of our humanity is our capacity to make life and to be alive. Undisturbed birth, physiological birth itself, is an experience that activates our bodies and our minds, and which initiates us not only into a particular value system and society, but which actually triggers a series of hormonal secretions that establish our ability to fully connect with other human beings, to actualize ourselves as the powerful, magical, mystical creatures that we truly are. Our senses and our embodiment are our source of our power. The corporatization and industrialization of birth and the deliberate forms of abuse and sabotage that are enacted on birthing mothers and their babies are very specifically designed to traumatize us and to initiate us into dependency, a very fabricated, false dependency. This is why I personally have garnered such widespread notoriety in the corporate media. This is why some of the largest mainstream media organizations have targeted me and my colleagues. The Daily Beast, NBC, Mother Jones, and now Rolling Stone magazine have all gone out of their way to misrepresent what I do personally in order to make it out as though I am the danger. To suggest that I am a dangerous person who preys primarily on other mothers, especially mothers who are extraordinarily stupid and vulnerable. So, gosh, you don't want that to be you, do you? They think you're stupid. They think we're all too stupid to think for ourselves. And in some cases, they may have something of a point, but the very fact that these organizations that are backed by money and power have little me in their crosshairs, well, it reveals the fact that they're running scared and that their project is on the verge of collapse. Because the thing is, I'm not that special. And in fact, there are thousands of other women out there like me, other mothers who have discovered that in fact, we don't need them. We don't need them to sell us birth control. We don't need their permission or their involvement or their political opinions on the topic of abortion. We don't need them in order to give birth at all. We don't need them and their plastic contraptions in order to mother or nurture our babies. We don't need them to educate our children. We don't need them and their garbage at all. And without our acquiescence, without our consent, implied or otherwise, without an audience, they can't control us anymore. Without our willing participation in our own demise and destruction, they cannot touch us. And they're scared. Multi-billion-dollar media conglomerates run by people and groups that own the pharmaceutical companies do not seek out to destroy an individual's reputation, like mine, by insinuating that they kill babies or by grasping pitifully for even the most meager crumb of evidence to support their being involved in a supposed conspiracy theory that is evident in plain sight, unless they're actually onto something, unless they constitute some kind of threat. This is precisely why I am so grateful to Dickson for her prowess as a satirist and for her courage in going out on a limb and taking the risk of taking on Rolling Stone magazine and showing them up as the bullies and cowards that they are. With what is surely a form of jocular sarcasm, Dickson muses on the fact that, quote, increased media scrutiny has not staunched Norris-Clark's platform. And at this point, Dickson again, surely deliberately, twists the facts in order to expose just how often this kind of fact twisting is employed to misrepresent those who stand up against corruption. Quote, Norris-Clark refers to herself as a bringer of light, a variation of light worker, end quote. No, actually, I have never, ever referred to myself as a bringer of light. Not ever, not once. But I do love the way Dickson poses, again in this instance, as a garbage tabloid journalist. I mean, it's just so obvious, and I know she's doing this purposefully. Again, so clever. If Dickson had actually been writing a sincere article, she would have done a quick fact check to find that actually I do title one of my videos Bringer of Light, in reference to the meaning of the name Lucifer in my discussion of a class of oxidative enzymes that produce bioluminescence and which is used in certain hydrogel-based pharmaceutical prophylactics. But I have never referred to myself as a bringer of light. But isn't Dickson ingenious in the way that she chooses to distort my words in order to underline just how underhanded so many journalists are? Dickson then proceeds to suggest that I am associated with a certain movement that has been widely denounced, a movement that begins with the letter that comes after R. And this part is actually quite hilarious. How does Dickson know that I'm associated with this, quote, baseless conspiracy theory about the existence of a deep state child sex trafficking ring run by leftists? Well, Dickson suggests that the very fact that I have spoken about an enzyme called luciferase, that exists in the world, in fact, as well as the fact that I've apparently used the hashtag #SaveTheKids. Don't know that I have. But again, Dickson is a master of parody because she actually quotes me in stating that I, quote, know absolutely nothing about this particular conspiracy movement, end quote. And so here is Dickson admitting that she has absolutely no evidence whatsoever that I have any association with such a movement, and yet continues to accuse me of, quote, pushing conspiracies connected with that movement, end quote. So honestly, this article is just one of the funniest spoofs of mainstream media disingenuity I've come across yet. Congratulations, Dickson. It's just, you've outdone yourself. The laughs continue as Dickson mentions how I push conspiracies, including, quote, the debunked claim that the novel Rona is no more lethal than the seasonal flu. And here, in a way, Dickson is correct. Because what the CDC has shown, in fact, is not that Rona is no more lethal than the seasonal flu, but that it actually has significantly lower a case fatality rate than the seasonal flu. So, interesting. On the topic of anti-axing in general, Dickson also craftily feigns innocence, referring to the anti-axing conspiracy theory in general as though there is such a thing, as opposed to simply a growing group of people all over the world who are beginning to question simply whether or not they feel comfortable submitting their bodies to be injected with a substance that the state has decided that they should be injected with. But I love that Dickson does this, because she is so clearly on our side, on the side of medical freedom. Because the heavy-handedness in the way that she postures here is so transparent, especially when she begins to muse on the mysterious phenomenon of why so many women especially, it seems statistically, are questioning the safety of injections, revealing in doing so that it's actually half of the entire population of the US, according to some stats, with very similar stats in Canada, that is very much opposed to receiving this injection. So the way Dickson navigates this particular part of her article reveals beautifully the way that misogyny is so often leveraged as a primary tool for the propagandist. If you can arrange to make women, the crazier the better, your scapegoat, well, gosh, you're off to the races. The misogyny is highlighted through Dickson's careful referencing of a couple of experts who are, doubtless it seems, corporate shills, and Dickson melodramatically extrapolates from those quotes that it is, as usual, women who are exceptionally vulnerable. And I just think it's so brilliant that Dickson is essentially impersonating a woman with a serious case of internalized misogyny. I mean, the very concept of pastel anon, because, hint, hint, the ladies really like soft pink, don't we, right? It's just so repulsively condescending, it's kind of hard to fathom. Again, a brilliant tactic. One of the cherries on top of this enormous shit cake of an article is the hilarious quote from one of the delightful dudes from the Conspirituality podcast. Derek Barris, quote, "There's no doubt about it," says Barris, co-host of the podcast Conspirituality, which covers the rise of conspiracy theories in the wellness industry. "There is this idea," says Barris, "that everything that has to do with the medicalization of childbirth is bad. It's that distrust of the medical environment combined with a real lack of scientific understanding," end quote. Why, thank you, Derek. You tell the little ladies how to science, why don't you? I mean, we would hardly recognize a science if it came shooting out of our vaginas. I'm so glad. I'm so glad you're around to set the record straight when it comes to the scientific facts on the topic of childbirth. I mean, Barris is, according to his own bio, a multifaceted author, media expert, and fitness instructor. So it makes sense that he would be interviewed for an article designed to disparage a woman who has herself given birth to 8 children, and who has supported thousands of other mothers in their home birth experiences, and who has spent the past 20 years studying the physiology of childbirth. What could I possibly know on the topic of birth that Derek Barris doesn't? And so you see again how obviously deliberate EJ Dickson has been in her incredibly slick orchestration of this parody. I have to admit, it's almost shocking that Dickson is so willing to humiliate poor Derek Barris by exposing his vanity and egotism in this way. She pulls no punches, that's for sure. But nowhere are Dickson's iron ovaries showcased more blatantly than in the almost bizarre passage she writes on race. Quote, "Purveyors of anti-axing messaging have also been accused of targeting Black and brown women, specifically, who harbor justifiable mistrust toward the medical establishment due to higher maternal mortality rates than their white counterparts." So just to be clear, because Black women experience higher mortality rates, they are somehow justified in their mistrust of the medical system, meaning that the mistrust that white women feel towards the medical system, because of course white women are actually abused as well. I know that may come as a huge surprise to some, but it is a fact, is somehow unjustified. It's very interesting. But let's keep going. Quote, "This trend appears to be continuing during the pandemic. During the summer, for instance, a video featuring a Black mother purportedly being injected by doctors against her will went viral in many natural childbirth and alternative health groups, particularly after anti-axer Robert Kennedy Jr. posted it on Instagram. Such content plays on a very real history of the Black community being used as a site for experimentation without informed consent." End quote. Wow. So it almost sounds here as though the implication is that somehow it's legitimate for a Black mother to object to being injected against her will and in contravention of her informed consent, and yet the unspoken undercurrent here is the implication that if a white woman advocates for informed consent, she is therefore somehow an anti-axing conspiracy theorist. Again, Dickson should really be crowned the queen of satire here, because the insane suggestion that sharing this video of a Black woman being medically abused is simply a tactic being used to sow doubt around injections and to somehow exercise racism, as opposed to what it is, which is a very real example of the kind of abrogation of fundamental rights that every single person on the planet right now, Black or white, is potentially facing, whether by force or by coercion, is, well, it's sickening, isn't it? Any thinking person would think that that's sick. The end result, Dickson writes, with blithe irony, of all this fear-mongering about injected pharmaceutical prophylactics has been an increase in actual hesitancy surrounding the Rona-19 injection. This is amazing. Dickson, I bow to you. Of course, the increase in actual hesitancy surrounding the Rona injection is all thanks to fear-mongering done by conspiracy theorists. It's definitely not the case, couldn't possibly be the case, that the increasing hesitancy surrounding the Rona injection might actually be as a result of a widespread global tidal wave of resistance towards an injection that, again, has not been properly tested, that has numerous stated adverse reactions, that has, just coincidentally, of course, been administered to several people who have subsequently died, again, total coincidence, that according to the manufacturer does not prevent symptoms and does not prevent transmission, and whose administration, according to most governments and health institutions, does not eliminate the need to continue to wear face coverings and to remain at a distance from our fellow human beings. But it couldn't possibly be the case that anyone's hesitancy might actually have to do with any of that. Dickson's article ends with a passage that, if I didn't know better, might be quite chilling. If I didn't know that Dickson was on our side, that she was on my side, and that she wrote this piece in order to expose the blatant dishonesty and immorality of the mainstream media in their willingness to viciously attack those who actually have the courage to speak out, like Dr. Christiane Northrup, who is also named in this article, I might actually find the passage that I'm about to describe quite frightening. But because I know that this entire article, Pastel Anon, is a send-up, a piece of satire, a piece of writing designed to disclose the truth, the following isn't as scary as it would certainly be if Dickson's article were sincere. Here it is. Quote, "Influencers like Norris-Clark will make the process of eliminating Rona-19 more drawn out than it needs to be. Once an injection becomes widely available, we will have these ongoing pockets of resistance and debates about the safety and efficacy and necessity of injections that will put a stick in the spokes, and it will make it a bigger public health hurdle than it needs to be." Wow. The power that I personally wield is monumental, isn't it? I am apparently single-handedly responsible for the continuation of a global pandemic. I mean, that's even more impressive than being featured in Rolling Stone magazine, isn't it? Now, just for the record, just for fun, just for anyone who might in fact read Dickson's article and take it seriously as a piece of actual journalism and not the deliberately histrionic mockery of a dumpster fire that I'm convinced that it is, please know, for the record, that I am definitely not suicidal. Not in any way, shape, or form. And I probably don't need to mention this because, gosh, I mean, who's really going to be concerned about little old me, hey? But just in case, I'll say it again. I am not suicidal. If you're curious as to why I do feel the need to stress such a point, go ahead and Google the name Brandy Vaughn. Ms. Vaughn was a former pharmaceutical company representative who ended up researching injected pharmaceutical prophylactics and becoming an activist and a champion for medical freedom. Ms. Vaughn's dead body was recently discovered by her 9-year-old son. Only a few weeks before her mysterious death, she made her own video, stating, as I'm doing now, that she was in no way suicidal. In any case, thank you, Rolling Stone magazine. Thank you, EJ Dickson, you're a real gem. And thank you especially to those who have been supporting me and my work through patreon.com. As always, I am 100% independent. I don't have any corporate or product sponsors. I am the sole breadwinner for my family and responsible for my 6 young children. And apart from the incredible, tireless, and constant support from my husband Lee, I love you. I am on my own. We're on our own. So please consider supporting my work through patreon.com/Bauhauswife. And if you're a woman looking for community and support, you're welcome in the Bauhauswife community, also available through patreon.com. Thank you so much, everyone. Love to all.